And it's my pleasure to introduce our presenter today, Joanne Smith. In addition to being president of Price to Profits Consulting, she's always been one of our audience favorites. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand over controls and let Joanne get started. So welcome.
Thank you. Just a little more background on me. Formerly, I was with DuPont for the bulk of my career, where I did head up corporate global marketing, pricing, and customer loyalty. I'm the author of several books. And in addition to my consulting firm, I am on the faculty of the Professional Pricing Society, as well as ISBM out of Penn State. So we're going to talk about what we ought to be doing with our pricing strategies, given the supply chain challenges. And before we jump in, I want to ground us so that we're on the same page on what is happening with supply chain. I'm going to talk about what's been happening, which you probably know, what we expect might happen so we can plan for future. So for more than a year now, and particularly the last 6 months, we've had the supply chain back up. So many of us, no matter where you are in the supply chain, are experiencing getting less raw materials, less parts, less of the things that you need, and they are coming in with much longer lead times and much higher cost. So COVID, indirectly or directly, is a major input to the whole supply chain issue. And it's really global implications, because much of what we get in the US, somewhere in the value chain, is coming in from Asia or some other part of the world. So as we look at the lockdowns and what they have done to the ability to manufacture, to actually how many people have gotten sick or had to quarantine, and then on top of that, how varying global governments have reacted with whether that's their lockdowns, their mandates on vaccinations, or subsidies, unemployment, putting more stimulus into the economy. They have all had an impact. So let's just look at US for a moment. Labor shortages all over the place. Durable good demand actually went up 15% over the last year. So a lot of people who used to have some money to spend on going out to dinner or taking a travel trip instead use that money to buy durable goods, inflating that. And some of the subsidies, unemployment, also added income to certain people that use that to buy. On top of that, anything coming in, we've had a very large import volume increase. And in fact, the cost of imports is up an incredible 10x just to move products, import the products to the US. To make matters worse, not only do we have those kind of bottlenecks coming out of us, but warehouse across the US is a record high, 1% vacancy only. So we got blockage across that. And then we have driver shortages, all making this a very tough environment. On top of that, we know we got further inflation just by the energy policies that the US has taken in moving away from independence of oil, and it's affecting global energy prices, if you will. So let's go to, okay, that's happening. But are we at the end of is the light at the end of the tunnel there? When is it going to be? Are we going to see more of this? Well, the unfortunate thing is, it's very, very hard to predict what's going to happen going forward. And in fact, to be able to predict the supply chain issues, you would literally have to be able to predict what's the next strain of COVID going to be, and is it going to be severe? And when it comes out, where our vaccination and meds work on that strain? Will people be sick? Will there be quarantines? How will governments respond globally to whatever that COVID situation is? Nobody can predict that. So best case scenario, not likely, best case scenario would be if there is no major negative swing in the COVID, that it's going to be likely around third quarter where some of you may see some relief in your supply chain getting more in line. But in many cases, like semiconductor, it's the full year and then some before we're going to see something line out. So we're going to be living with this for quite some time. And to boot, This week, with the Ukraine situation and Russia invading there, the inflation as it relates to gas and oil prices is going to put a whole nother potential layer and uncertainty into the prices there. And we know that oil and gas, right, they basically impact most raw material parts coming at us. So they're going to work themselves through the chain, and we're going to probably see yet even more inflation. So I would say buckle up. This is not short term. It's going to continue, and we might be talking about what we need to do with price today. And in a couple months, we might be talking yet again what we might need to be doing with our price. So with that, let's turn to that pricing strategy. Should you raise? And for most of you, it's should I raise again or again and again? Or should I hold? And clearly, most of you have market dynamics that would suggest you should be considering raising. You are probably seeing more rising cost than you have already covered. Many of you probably have tight supply because you're constrained in raw materials. And of course, whenever you're tight, you want to be able to shift price up to those most willing to pay for you. And odds are you got your top leaders pushing you to make sure you cover your cost and that your margins are not being squeezed during these tough times. But on the other hand, many of your sales teams are thinking, we have disappointed our customer base. They are so frustrated with us. We are not performing like they always got that high performance from us. We now have long lead times. We're not getting them as much product as they want and nowhere near when they want it. We've already raised price at least once, maybe more, right? So we're getting out of line with our customers, or getting upset with us, if you will. And further, some of you, particularly you that might have specialty products that pride yourself in value pricing, you might be in a position where you're thinking, oh, we don't do cost plus pricing. Therefore, just because our costs are rising is not a reason for us value pricers to raise price. And I want to address that first, because that is not the way I want you thinking at this point in time. In fact, you should be considering raising price, and it is absolutely in line with the principle of value pricing. Let me share why. So just to set the stage, what's value pricing? It's when we understand the price of the alternative, the next best alternative. We quantify our value, how much more value we deliver the customer so they make more money. And then we set the price so that net value we add, we share. The customer gets some benefit, and we get some benefit for bringing that innovation. So if we look over time at price, and let's look at that blue line first. I'm calling that the market price, the average price of all your competitors. Over time, when you bring out a new product, it's somewhat unique, you get higher price, and through its life cycle, often you get more competition, and it begins to lower in price. Now, it might swing up and down over time with cost and tight supply, but in general, over time, it drops. If you're a value pricer, if you've got the best out there, that's the orange line. That's suggesting that you get a premium over the marketplace. Now, here's the thing. A lot of that marketplace price, a lot of those alternatives, at least the cheapest end of them, are undifferentiated products likely. They might be commodity products. And they are likely to be companies that are getting hit with these costs that are going to raise their price, appropriately so, to cover their cost. Now the blue line moves up. And if you're value pricing, you've just closed the gap if you have not increased. So if the base, the alternative is moving up, you need to move up just to hold your true value. And let me give you an example of this. This was a specialty business or polymer business. And the business actually had a very large basic polymer commodity indexed product. But they took a small stream and they made a specialty polymer with it. And the specialty polymer, they value priced. It was worth more, They set a good price. Now what happened? This is actually taken from back in like 2007, 2008. And at that time, we were having unprecedented energy rises. In fact, oil price in 2007 hit $147 a barrel. So far worse than even today. Back at that time, those energy costs affected the cost of manufacture of both polymers. The base polymer raised price as commodities tend to do more easily, the more skilled. They raise price to cover their costs, keep their margins good. The specialty product took the high road. No, we're value pricing, right? We don't price on our cost. Well, when I looked back at a dozen years of their data and what they had done with pricing versus market price, I actually found a couple of places where the price of the specialty polymer not only came close to the basic polymer, actually went below the price of the basic commodity polymer at times. That's just wrong, right? It should always have a premium over the basics. So if you're into value pricing, I want you to think not only your next best alternative, but what is that whole class of products that are below you and maybe some more specialty end? And are you positioned at a specialty product line appropriate to the really poor man's commodity version? And make sure you keep your industry at a healthy premium versus lower end things. All right. With that, let's turn back to how do we really make that decision? So what I'm doing any pricing decision, my guiding principle is always that I want the world, the market, to see us and perceive us as fair and trustworthy. That means we want our customers to see us as fair and trustworthy. Our customers, influencers, competitors, our own sales force. The more we are perceived that way, the more we will have a less aggressive market, the more our customers will accept what we will do, and we will have better long-term relationships. So with that in mind, how do we do it? For sure, one of the things we're not going to do is raise price so egregiously that we are viewed as greedy or gouging. And most of you are probably not going to err on that side. That would be when we really egregiously raise our price well beyond what our cost situation is. It's usually taking advantage. We saw a little bit pockets of this when the pandemic first hit. You see it in areas where there's hurricanes or tornadoes and perhaps the town's wiped out, nobody has good drinking water, and somebody comes in and charges 10x for, a bottle of water. That's not what we're about. That's not fair. It's not reasonable. What we're looking for is a fair raising of price that is both fair to your customer, but fair to you. And what I find that most companies err on the side of looking out for their customer at the expense of their own business health. In a sense, they're bailing out their customer. They're saying, all right, we're getting hit with all these costs, but oh my gosh, we feel so bad for our customer. We'll only partially push it along and we will eat that margin decline. And that is not a healthy way to do business. Let me show you a few examples of bailouts and what they have done. In this particular example, in this housing market, where the supplier base was supplying small, let me call them mom pop, few people, contractors that worked on homes. And for years in this particular case, every time there was an increase, these small contractors pushed back. They said, we can't take this. We barely make money. We're barely getting by. We cannot pass these along. Don't give it to us. And the suppliers backed off, right? They felt bad for these contractors that were barely getting by, and they backed off. And over time, the supplier base went from very, very healthy, good margins to barely making money, all because they were looking after their customer and not looking at their own profitability. What was the result? In the case of my client, of course, they brought me in to help them understand how to move price along, but they also changed out leadership and made major layoffs from leaders through sales because they had hurt their profitability that bad. And by the way, once we put price trading in place, that group learned how to pass price on and did it. And lo and behold, the contractors got the confidence to be able to move their price. Let me show you one more example in this bailout kind of situation. This was in the agricultural space. And this was a business every year, like clockwork, they raised about 2%. And every year they got about 1% max of that price increase. So what was happening? Their margins were declining, especially on their commodity crops. Their specialty ones, they did better at getting price. Commodity ones really coming down in their margins. So they brought me in. And I was doing a consulting project with them. So let me give you kind of an example. Their supply chain simplified. The supplier was selling through to many small farmers, small growers, thousands of them. And they were selling to the big box predominantly, Walmart's, Home Depots, those that had huge pricing power. And these small growers were like, no, we can't pass this along. We're tiny little us, and here's big Walmart. They won't accept it. And we are already living as farmers with small margins. So what did the crop supplier do? They ate some of the increase. They took the squeeze of the supply chain unto themselves, hurting their own margins. They bailed out these small customers, thinking they're doing the right thing. As we came in, we did the work and whatnot, I actually suggested that they go out with an average of a 10% increase. Some products were 25%, some were 2%. So it was a very granular level. But in general, a hugely more higher increase than they had been done for the years to try and recover and get back to more healthy levels. And we did training and we got the skill up. And what happened? The result here? They actually achieved 9.5%. That's what they realized with no volume loss. The key is those small growers who thought they could not pass it along, when they were all faced with a big enough amount that they couldn't eat it, and they realized that all the other farmers were getting hit this way, they had the courage to stand up to the Walmarts and the Home Depots and insist on fair price. And lo and behold, they got it. They got it. So us bailing them out had not helped them at all. They actually did better when they were forced to stand on their own abilities. All right, so back here we are. How do we do this fair and trustworthy? What do we think about? There are 4 things that you need, all 4 lined up to be really successful, to say we should do an increase and we're going to be successful with this increase in a way that our long-term relationships are not hurt. So let's break these down. Number 1, market dynamics. I'll bet you just about everybody on the phone has favorable market dynamics to raise price now. Every one of you are probably seeing rising raw materials, parts, freight, warehouse, energy, labor cost hitting you, shrinking your margins if you do not move them along. And your competition is feeling those same pressures. And at least half of you, if not more, are also tightly constrained because you can't get the ingredients that you need fully. So market dynamics are probably very favorable for all of you. That should not be the issue. That turns to the question of, if I do it, will I lose too much share? Is it worth it? So let's turn to number 2, that price volume trade-off. How much price should I increase versus the share I might lose so that I'm in a better profit position? And here's the good news for most of you. Price is far more powerful at generating earnings than volume, typically 2 to 4%, 2 to 4 times, more powerful at getting at earnings. So you can risk some share. And just to give you a small taste, I'm giving you a little break-even volume chart here. And if you look at the left-hand column down, contribution margin, and I've highlighted in blue a 30% contribution margin. So that's more like commodity product, lower contribution margins, where the last line, 50%, would be more what you would see plus or minus in the specialty product range. And if I go to my far right column where I say 10% price increase, and I look at the cross of those two, I'm basically saying if I increase my price 10% on this more commoditized 30% margin, I can afford to lose 25% of my entire share. And if I lose less than that, I will make more money with that increase. All right, if I lost more than 25%, I would actually be hurting earnings. But in today's world, who's going to lose 25% of their share? It's virtually not going to happen because your competitors probably do not have the raw material supply locked up in any way to be able to service or take on that level of high earnings. So the odds are in the short term, it's almost assuredly that you would not lose enough share that you would be far better off raising price and increasing your earnings. Now you're probably thinking, but what about long term? What will my competitors do, and will their actions cause them to maybe take my share downstream when things loosen up? So let's turn a little bit to our competitors and what they might do at this time. Now, your competitors are facing the same market dynamics. They have every reason to want to raise price in a similar vein as you, assuming you've taken a relatively fair price. They are probably constrained also in their volume. So this is not a time when they could take on more share or use it to pick up share. So the odds are great. Your competitors are either leading you in a price increase or likely to follow you in an increase. But, big but most likely to happen if your competitor base views you as trustworthy and fair. If they view you as very aggressive in the marketplace, they're not likely to follow. If they're afraid you're going to say you're going to increase, but you're not really, you're going to get scared and back off, they may be afraid you're going to try and pick up their share. So they will be less likely to raise price or follow you up if they don't trust that you do what you say. And that kind of goes back to your skill level, which we'll talk in the next slide on. I find that virtually every client that I go in with, as they're learning to really advance their pricing, they have behaviors in their sales team and quite often in their leadership team that unintentionally are causing more aggressive markets, causing their own competitors to be afraid to go with price increase, causing their own competitors to be more aggressive. They don't even realize it. So you may be doing things that are actually hurting your entire market dynamics and not recognizing it. So when it comes to skill, we want to be able to take out any of those behaviors that are hurting our market. We want to add in some positive behaviors that actually help the entire market move up to what it would be and should be its fair market price. So when it comes to skill, I have done surveys with thousands of salespeople across many, many companies, from small to predominantly multi-billion-dollar companies, and predominantly very, very experienced salespeople. And 90% of these folks self-rate their ability to price negotiate as mediocre at best. They are not confident. They don't have the courage, they don't have the skill to really know how to raise price, not only with high success, but do it so that good customer relationships exist over time. Right? So this is a real need because we don't have that skill. I can assure you, you are doing behaviors that are causing more aggressive competitor dynamics than you realize. And you're making it tougher for your customers to accept your increase. Now, the good news is that's something you can turn around, in a 1-2 day kind of thing. I often work with companies where we do training in best practice, and we combine that with applied training. We teach, we apply it, and design our price increase. We teach and design our communication plan. We teach and design how we're going to respond to tough questions. So that at the end of the day, marketing and sales are completely aligned. They understand the risks that they're facing collectively. They've all agreed on what those risks are and how they're going to perform. And it makes step change difference in their ability to move things in a way that they get the increase without hurting long-term relationships. Here's just one example. This was a very recent example, working with an industry that was absolutely a dog-eat-dog world. Really one of the toughest type of industries out there. In fact, in such a way that the industry practice wasn't just even holding price. It was like declining price of products year over year. So now they were in a position, rising costs, their margins already shrinking are now shrinking in a way that they, was almost compelling to act. And I did a 2-day workshop with those folks. The sales folks came in and, like, to a person, they were scared. They were like, we can't do this. Our customers won't accept it. They expect decreases. At best, let's hold. And in fact, by the end of the 2 days, not only did they have the confidence of what management put forward, they actually pushed back in certain segments, certain product lines to say, we can go and should go higher here, here, and here. So they literally went out with a higher increase with full confidence. And what did they end up with? 100% of their customers took the increase. There was a few cases where they gave a 2 to 4 week delay in when it went into effect, but they all took it, right? So that's the kind of, certainly back up, that's kind of thing that I have done, and that's how quick it turns around. Done this with many, many different companies, if you will, from experienced parts, chemicals, even with those that have done it with me, doing it again 6 months later in context of a different working environment. Maybe it's less training, maybe it's more workshop. But when we bring that together and we get our teams working all of it together and ever understanding risk, huge in the context of best practice. Now, let me just make a closing kind of comments here, right? One, as I already pointed out, even if you're specialty price, make sure that it's not just about value pricing your good, that you're managing industry price, because you are a piece of that. And you need to take actions that keep your industry appropriately healthy and at the right price. 2, when things are favorable to raise price, they are absolutely favorable to change policies and practices. So if you have some volume brackets, you have multi-year contracts with price without price openers, you have payment terms that are too long. These are the times to look at your policies and say, can we correct these and tighten up our policies during this period as well? And last, for those more advanced, you might want to get into segmentation, customer needs-based segmentation, so you understand your best customers from your weaker customers. You understand where you are advantaged, and you're going to have really loyal customers to those other customer base that you love, but they're not thinking you're really all that. And how do you tighten up those relationships? Setting differential policies so that we're really making sure that we get more profit out of the ones that have been dragging us down, and that we better serve the ones that are our long-term top customers. And the last thing that I will just say, if you want to learn more about this, certainly my book, The Price Negotiation Playbook, which they're going to raffle off, that's one way. But also, Professional Pricing Society, I'm holding an open public training there, so you can certainly attend that. They also have similar training from me in an online, on-demand kind of training. right? Normally I might do that coming in and working with a full sales team, but this is a great opportunity for this public session coming up. All right, so with that, that's the presentation, Nick.
Thank you, Joanne. And I'm going to take control back. Wonderful presentation, so thank you. So we had a few questions come in during the webinar, so it's not too late. So if you have anything you'd like to ask, there will be a Q&A session in just a little bit. As a reminder, if you enter a question, you'll be entered to win a raffle of the price negotiation playbook, as Joanne said. And also in the exit survey, you can indicate if you're interested in hearing from Joanne and learning more about her workshops as training as well. Leave a note there, and we'll make sure we route to the appropriate place. Now, before we jump into the Q&A, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Brian Hannon. He's VP of Sales here at Leverage Point. And he's going to be sharing a bit more about how our SaaS platform can help put some of the topics that Joanne spoke about today in executing your value pricing strategies from the value creation aspect all the way to the selling aspect. So, Brian, I'm going to pass control, and feel free to take it away.
Great. Thank you, Nick. And thanks, Joanne. Great presentation. A lot of good information, especially about the current events. And Joanne keyed on, and I'm going to hopefully be showing my screen in a moment.
We can see your screen, Brian.
Okay, great.
Okay.
You can see it. Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, so one of the things Joanne touched on a few times was, I think, the need to be able to communicate a lot of the decisions that are made. You know, people put a lot of effort and time into thinking about both, you know, pricing changes as well as value-based pricing in general, and how that is delivered to the customer is very important. So what we tend to see over the years is when salespeople are asked to make financial arguments to their customers, in many cases they're given spreadsheets to do this. And those tend to fall flat for a number of reasons, but mostly because it's just delivering too much information at one time. And salespeople just aren't comfortable with that approach. So what you're really left with is maybe a very small percentage of your best salespeople can use those tools and be effective, but the broader sales force has a much tougher time really being able to use a spreadsheet and communicate that value story in an effective way. So what ends up happening is they just don't do it. They fall back to their sort of product-centric knowledge, and they fall back to their 100 PowerPoint product decks where they're much more comfortable. And I think, as probably everyone on the call knows, people are starting to get very exhausted with those very long product presentations. So what we provide is a platform that helps our customers take that knowledge and those decisions and really create a value story, excuse me, that salespeople can use in a much broader way. And so I'm going to show you a very quick example here, but we're always very happy to go into much more detail. We have customers in pretty much every B2B segment. And anytime you have a sales process that is, relatively, or I'd say reasonably long in terms of, greater than a few weeks, and you have an offering that is priced where, customers are making decisions, and maybe it's teams within the customer who are making decisions, it's important to be able to communicate this value. And so the example I have here is for a fictitious company called Dean Chemicals. And what you'll see here is a story that's embedded in my browser. And as a salesperson, I could pull this up at any point. It's a cloud-based application that allows me to load the story in the browser. What you don't see is the value model that's embedded inside of the story itself. The value model allows me to customize the story and really make it more apply to the particular customer situation. So, for example, in this case, maybe I'm talking with BMW, and BMW starts to tell me that they're producing many more vehicles per year than my current sort of story talks about, and maybe they're using more material per vehicle as well. And so as I make changes to the story, the actual numbers start to change as well. And the goal of these stories is to be able to communicate the impact in different ways. So maybe here we can talk about the coding and the cost of the coding on a per vehicle basis, or maybe on an annual basis based on the number of vehicles. But it also allows us to dig into the individual areas of value that our particular offering provides. In this case, there's 3 key areas of value, and there's actually some negative value that the offering requires in terms of investment from the customer. So here we have, there's an undercoating step that becomes really non-existent with this offering. There are reduced warranty costs that over time become very important to BMW, and that's a reduction of 40%. Now again, these numbers can be changed if the salesperson is allowed to change these based on the feedback from the customer. So BMW becomes part of the conversation and part of the story. And then as we get towards the end of the story, we're able to then make some claims about how much value we think we can provide and why it's a good reason for BMW to reconsider the supplier that they have today and consider maybe investing in a more expensive solution that will provide more value overall. So here we might save this back into the cloud, and we can then export it into a PDF or a PowerPoint. So again, very simple example, but what we provide is a platform that allows our customers to create all different types of stories. We help them do that, and we'd be happy to talk with anyone, show them some examples, and talk about how we might be able to help you folks do it as well. So Nick, I will pass this back to you.
Great, I can go grab that right now. And thank you, Brian. And just as I mentioned before, if you're interested in learning anything about what you just saw in terms of putting your pricing models into the cloud and having a better ability to convey it through sales presentations, leave us a note in the exit survey, and we can get you in touch with the appropriate people, which is most likely Brian. And now I think it's time for the Q&A, so let me get my camera on. And Joanne, are you ready to get started?
There.
All right, cool. Let's do it.
On.
So in terms of price increases, you mentioned this a little bit in the webinar about companies dealing with multiple increases, especially given the circumstances on the ground today. How does the sales conversation change knowing that you might have to have this multiple times?
All right. Well, as you know, anytime we're increasing, communication is going to be so critically important. And the more honest and trustworthy as we do it, the best. So I would basically say, you know, we ought to be, your leadership ought to be announcing these things with a minimum of a customer letter signed by a high-level person, and also, if you can, public announcement. But salespeople could and should be letting their customers know that you are in a planning cycle, you expect increases to come because of all the inflationary supply chain issues. And as soon as they know what that amount is, you know it's going to be passed along. So giving a little heads up to their customer base. And I think being clear and honest with your customer base that we don't have a crystal ball any more than anybody else on this hugely volatile year in just about every single industry across the US, where we're seeing these unprecedented inflation, supply chain issues. And so to let them know, right, you've got to be ready, because we can't see this any better than our governments or the experts can see it.
Yep, that's exactly right. And we just got one that is I think a cousin to this question is about the best way to define the value and communicate reasoning for a price increase to the customer. And as you just mentioned, transparency and communication is key. But do you have any other specific advice in terms of what you would communicate to them specifically?
So, right, we always want our rationale for whatever our price move is. So if it's because we got a brand new product and it deserves a premium, then the example Brian just gave is like phenomenal, right? The more we can visually show in nice, easy ways why we deserve that particular price, we're better off. In today's world, where it's mostly broad-based, it's not product by product, it's not value so much as strategically getting our customer base up, then we got to really articulate what is our rationale? What costs are going up, or the tightness of the market, because more likely they're going to accept it if they realize it is real. And competitors are more likely to follow if they hear about it and they understand your reasons, and they're thinking, I got the same darn reasons. I ought to be acting in the same way. So the more we can do that effectively with our rationale, the more it will seem fair and appropriate.
That all makes sense. And yes, transparency is always best. So Brian alluded to this in his portion, but I'm actually curious to hear your thoughts because we got another question on it. But in terms of frontline sales and organization, you have the top performing reps that might be able to do this, have the experience to do this with skill, and there's other ones, the average one or the ones that might be newer to the organization that might not have the confidence to hold on prices. What things have you seen that really strong reps do that some of the others might not?
Well, number one, a strong salesperson recognizes when it is fair and appropriate for their company to be moving price. And as a result, they usually have the confidence to hold firm. They do not back down and hurt their own company's health for the customer. So, and honestly, right, if you're not confident in front of that customer, they're going to sense it. They are going to work you over until they get you to back off. But let me just take it a step further. When I look at some of the best salespeople, not only do they do a good job of clearly communicating the reason for their pricing, they often, holding firm to the fact that's a fair price, they also look to how they can help their customer pass that along downstream, as an example, or coach their customer. And I'll just say I was with a group yesterday that's a perfect example where their customer base was less sophisticated, more than mom and pop, less skilled, that might not quite have an understanding of what's happening in the world and how it's going to affect them. And in this particular business, many of their customers would lock in multi-year contracts, put out bids and quotes for contract or construction work as if their prices from their raw materials were going to be held. So advising your customers to rethink their own strategy, to make sure that they don't lock in long-term on prices, that they have price openers or price protection given these volatile times. And in fact, in some cases, the salespeople have offered to say, look, I will even go with you to your customer's customer, right? I will go downstream with you if that helps to explain to that customer base why this has to happen and why it is happening to you, and you need to pass it along. So really, we're going to hold firm on our price, but we're going to have empathy for our customer, and anything we can do to help them, without giving up our price, help them win is that's the thing.
Great. Another one that's related, kind of just in terms of this, I think is a good block and tackle one. Some folks probably are dealing with indirect sales models, maybe dealing with channel partners that need to be consulted and trained as well. Do you have any thoughts in terms of communicating that when you might be dealing with other people reselling your product?
Absolutely, and in fact, it's not unusual that some of my clients will then hire me to train their distributor arm, because our distributor arm, if it's a big piece of your business, if they don't understand the messages and how their own behaviors are affecting the market, we can really have a hard time passing it through. And usually our distributors perhaps are a little bit less skilled at understanding those sort of things. And so we got to communicate really clearly with them. And the last thing we do not want to do with distributors is often they'll look to not take the increase, and they'll go back to you and say, well, we can't do it here. You got to give me relief because I need to pick up this business or I need to retain this business. And we can't bail out our distributors. that would be enabling them not to do what they need to do, which is fairly pass the increase along.
That makes sense. This is great questions today. Another good one on services. So have you seen companies that you've worked with change the way they approach services and price services given the higher input costs? And that presumably might include labor as well.
Well, I don't know if I can see that quite directly as you've kind of said it, but clearly, even if you're in the service industry, you might have more labor cost, whatnot, that you need to pass on, just like you had a physical product. But what I will say, I see some companies do surcharges, like they might do freight surcharges. They might do import surcharges, supply chain, literally supply chain surcharges, or literally charge separately for their technical service or their special analysis or things that they do beyond the product during these times to compensate. I personally am more of a fan of making sure you get it into your base price and not adding on a bunch of services or surcharges is what I meant to say, because those things are more difficult to manage and to retain longer as you go through.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we're getting a lot of questions, but I think we have time for one more. And I think this is a good one in terms of companies that might not be that might be dealing with future increases. But let's just say this person has decided to make a hold decision for now, but know that they will need the room to increase prices in the future. What are some just general strategies that you see to cultivate trust with the customer, maybe in anticipation of a future price increase?
All right, so if I understand, if we're talking about a company that's elected to hold, even though they are probably being hit with rising costs and maybe tight supply, and if you elect to hold, you said to build trust with the customer. I might contend it's a double-edged sword, and you might be creating a distrust with your customer and certainly with your competitive base. So if you got competitors raising price and you are holding, even if you think you're doing it for all the right reasons, and you're willing to take that margin hit in your business, two things happen. Your customers are probably looking at you saying, like, all your competitors are raising price. They have all these cost issues. You must have them. They are now looking at you as probably desperate for share, right? Afraid to move price. So now they know they can beat you up on price because you won't stand up with integrity for your own health. Or they're thinking, my God, they must have such huge margins that they can afford to absorb all these costs, so I better beat them up more. So now you got customers that are just going to look at you as somebody that they want to really beat up to see how far they can work you. Competitors, on the other hand, now are not able to raise price near successfully because every customer is like, hey, your key competitor over here is not raising price, so there's no way I'm going to take yours. I'll jump ship. So your competitors back off their price increase because of your behavior. Now, 3 months later, your management's beating the crap out of you because your margins are squeezed and you decide to go out. Well, it's too late because your competitors have given up and you go out by yourself and your customers are like, no, your competitors didn't raise, you can't. Creates a really downward spiral and distrust with competitors and customers that will hurt you for the long haul. If it is the right thing and you have the cost and you have the tightness, then you ought to be doing the fair thing for the health of your business. Not greedy, but fair, and doing it in a way so your whole competitive base raises up and remains healthy.
Makes sense. And I think that's been a constant theme throughout the presentation. So I just want to say thank you for joining us today. This has been a really timely presentation for our audience. And thank you to the audience for all the great questions you submitted. And we're going to try to get to those that we didn't answer after the webinar. So before you go, just a quick reminder that in the exit survey, you can also pre-register for next month's webinar. And we've got a really good one. Todd Selger will be joining us, and he's going to be sharing some of the latest best practices for both value quantification and selling from the second edition of his book, First Value Then Price, which is recently released. So make sure you pre-register in the exit survey. That should be another good one. And that's going to be it from us today. So a big thank you for Joanne for joining us today. Thanks for Brian for the presentations, and thank you for joining us. And from all of us here at Leverage Point, have a wonderful rest of your week and take care.